opportunity to discuss Dharma, Ahimsa, and how we can restore the earth, providing background from Hinduism as well as the context from all traditions and all different religions. Thank you so much. I'd love if you can introduce yourself a little bit before we kind of go into a deeper conversation, but introduce yourself and share what you do and why the Parliament of Religions today has a directive for climate change.
Well, thank you so much, and to Go Dharmic for having me in this really important conversation. Happy Earth Day to everybody watching out there. I'm Joshua Basofin. I'm the Climate Action Director at Parliament of the World's Religions. I've been an attorney and a sustainable business consultant, and for the last 3 years, I've been working with Indigenous and faith communities around the world on climate issues. Let me tell you just really briefly a little bit about Parliament of the World's Religions, if folks out there haven't heard of us. Our history goes back to 1893, when the World's Fair happened in Chicago. A few people, namely some Hindu swamis, actually had a very novel idea of bringing people from different faiths together for a conversation. This was really the nascence of the interfaith movement back in the the late 19th century, and they had that conversation, and it was dynamic and prayerful, and there was a lot shared. And because of the success of that, 100 years later, some folks in Chicago got together and decided to do a centennial of that in 1993. And we've been doing these Parliament of the World's Religions convenings ever since. Somewhere along the way, we thought, well, we have these conversations every few years, but then we kind of go back and plan the next one. A lot of folks in our community said, what are you going to do in between? How are those conversations going to filter down into action? So we started a climate action program, and we drew on these kind of core capabilities that we have of convening people from different faiths and facilitating these conversations. And we started a climate commitments project to help people think about how the words and statements of their faith leaders can cascade into commitments that they make, very personal commitments coming from their faith traditions, where they change their behaviors and their lifestyles, their diets, their energy use, green their congregations, all of these kinds of things. And that was about 3 years ago we started that program, and we're really getting going. So again, happy to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
No, brilliant. And so it's 1893 when the initial conversations and the Parliament began, and I believe that's when Swami Vivekananda, who was at the conference at 1893, and I must have listened to Swami Vivekananda's speech 100 times of the Parliament of World Religions, and inspiring, and it's been carried forth within Hindu culture and tradition since that time, and it's very well known throughout India because of that universal message that he came to bring at the time, and really that emphasis on Vedanta, and that we are all divine, and the whole planet and every living being is divine. And I listened to it just this morning before this conversation to just really connect with the Parliament of the World's Religions and understand Swami Vivekananda's message of universality and equivision amongst all traditions. And he really appealed, in his words, I could feel the spirit of what Swami Vivekananda was saying, is that we are all one. And he hoped that that conference was the beginning of that universality and treating all the different traditions just as streams to the same one location, streams to the same river, or rivers to the ocean. So what would you say on that part? Like, I'm interested to know from your personal perspective of that. Has the Parliament continued in that same spirit to bring that to the fore?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that analogy. You hear like a few different versions of it, but that idea that that we're drinking from different wells, but it's the same water. There's like different paths, but they all lead to God and to godliness, and that being interconnected. I think you see that also in the Sikh tradition. I love the idea in the Sikh tradition of the langar. this meal that's served to people. And the way it was explained to me, the purpose of the langar is that Sikhs want people to have a path to God. They want people to have a spirituality and an ability to connect with God. But you can't do that unless your basic needs are met. And what's one of your basic needs? You need to be fed. You need to be fed physically so that you can then be fed spiritually. And yeah, I think we do really take that concept of interconnectedness and all being, all of us having a path to God very seriously in our work at the Parliament. And it's very much instrumental in our climate work as well, because we share this planet. We share all of these resources that I think a benevolent God, or in some traditions, a spirit or an energy has bestowed upon us that we not only benefit from, but that we are mandated, we are obligated to be caretakers of. And that is a manifestation of our interconnectedness. We are stewards together on the spaceship. And if one of us drops that, abdicates that responsibility to be stewards, then none of us are gonna do well.
No, I love that. And I just want to share the idea of Sanatana Dharma, which is, like, I love the example of the Sikh culture and the Sikh tradition of langar. It's actually central to what we do with Go Dharmic, the idea of langar or prasad as divine food distributed. A Sikh friend once said to me that langar is the guru of Guru Nanak. Langar is the body of Guru Nanak. So when we are distributing that food in langar or prasad, we are actually distributing something very sacred. It's as if that is the body of God. And I think the Eastern traditions as a whole have been very, and maybe more of the ancient traditions or religions of the old world are much more comfortable with the idea that this is all the body of God. And we're distributing that out of love and compassion. And through that, we can be much more careful in how we care for it. We don't throw it away. We don't pollute. We have to treat it with reverence. Every meal more slowly, more kindly. And I think I've got a verse from the Rig Veda, which is considered one of the oldest religious texts in the world. It's certainly the oldest Hindu religious text, but maybe in the world religions, one of the oldest. And it says, may the sky and earth, the all-knowing mother and father, nourish us with plentiful food through their wonderful deeds. May both work together in unison for the benefit of all living beings. And I think, for me, something that's potentially 5,000-6,000 years old, saying that the sky is our mother and the earth is our mother and the sky is our father. That is is teaching us to treat the world as if it is our family, and that we are all one, and that we need to venerate and respect that. And I really believe that Sikhism and Guru Nanak, that what he stood for is not just one tradition; it's for humanity, and it was service to all. So anybody who came was fed, whether a king or whether a poor person, come sit down together. And with Go Dharmic, a big emphasis of ours is food distribution. So we have a campaign called Feed Everyone, where volunteers in many different countries collect food waste, and before it goes out of date, many supermarkets or many places, they try to capture quality food and then share it with people who are homeless or struggling families or elderly and vulnerable who potentially have been isolated. In just the last year alone, the volunteers have distributed around 3.5 million meals through food distribution. And for me, like, when you consider that there's so much food waste in Western countries, in particular, the town where I grew up and was born is a town called Luton. And that town has a child poverty rate of 46%. Children going to schools and not having enough food. in their stomachs. Here in the, what is the 7th richest country in the world, we have that situation 30 miles from London.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think it's not possible for us to comprehend that this level of waste is happening.
Yeah, well, and I mean, this is a massive problem at a global scale. I mean, I've heard statistics that something like 1/3 of global food supply is wasted somewhere along the value chain, between harvest and post-consumerism, right? So somewhere between when it's taken off the fields and when the strawberries kind of start to mold in somebody's refrigerator. And so, I mean, this work that you're doing in redirecting something that would have been food waste in order to solve the problem of localized hunger. I mean, that's massive. But not only that, but you're creating a kind of mindfulness, right? I mean, you're solving a logistical problem, but you're also creating a mindfulness of this problem of food waste and hunger, this kind of double-edged sword. And I love that. I think that's great. And there are so many traditions that talk about, the finding spirituality through something mundane. This is something I love about the Jewish tradition in particular, is, there's a lot of rules in Judaism. If you practice as an observant Jew, there are rules that govern just about everything that you do. And so you might say, like, okay, but I mean, some of these rules seem really minute, but, a lot of folks who follow these rules say, but that's a reminder every day. When I get out of bed and I say this prayer, when I eat this particular kind of food and I say this prayer, it's a very mundane thing connected to the mundaneness of daily life, but it lifts me up into spirituality because it's a reminder, that of who I am and what I'm doing on this planet. And I think in a lot of ways, what you're doing with your food program is a reminder of our purpose, on this planet, and that is to have compassion for our fellow beings, our fellow human beings, and other species. So thank you for doing that.
Well, there's two main things what we try to create from the food distribution. The first is to redistribute food waste that's that we need to raise awareness of the vast amounts of it, especially around certain festival times. Like if you think about the overstocking around Christmas, for example, and as a charity, we see the food waste levels skyrocket at times where there's over stockpiling and then huge amounts of waste. The second core part is really, largely related to the environment as well as non-violence and welfare, where we try to promote the value of plant-based diets and to educate around the importance of reducing harm through our diets. So we prepare meals or we give food kits with instructions of how to cook vegan plant-based meals. We believe that these are much lower in cost when compared to animal-based meals, and also have very good health benefits, but also most importantly for our discussion today, that it's considered one of the most important acts to move away from animal produce and towards plant-based diets for the environment. And I just a few weeks ago, there was a big Oxford study which came out, and the lead researcher, Joseph Poor, says a vegan diet is probably the single biggest way to reduce your impact on planet Earth, not just greenhouse gases, but global acidification, eutrophication, land use, and water use. So I think the science is now, clear, and there is no real two ways about it. And what I really feel is that although in the context of religions and spirituality and belief, it's only really as good as the actions that we follow up on and that we live and that we really radiate. The words and the practices and the rituals I love, but it's how are you helping others? How are you serving others? And I think Buddhism's got this wonderful idea of the Bodhisattva, where you have a person who's achieved enlightenment, but doesn't go into the oneness because he chooses to stay here and serve, and to stay in the world and to help others. And they have a vow where we say, I will not take enlightenment until everybody else has achieved enlightenment. So they
That's
stay in the
beautiful.
Bodhisattva. Yeah, and Hanuman is very much a similar kind of being, where I'm deeply inspired by Hanuman and the Ram tradition within Hinduism. And there is a scene where Hanuman is down on his knees, and even Ram cannot lift him up. Ram, who is the universal God and the supreme reality, cannot lift him up because he is so devoted towards serving Ram through all living beings on earth and staying here to help others, that he remains in that locked position on his knees in a worshipful position. And I think the spirituality in action is actually expressed through Dharma, through our universal responsibility here. And like, as you said, compassion is the core of what I understand to be Dharma.
Right. Well, and you and I have talked a lot about, the concept of nonviolence and in your tradition, and in, Buddhism and Jainism, this idea of ahimsa, right, of nonviolence. And I like that you mentioned plant-based foods, because there are, I think, so many prongs of nonviolence when we start to shift to a plant-based diet, or even a mostly plant-based diet. And I think it's important to note, that it doesn't have to be black and white, right? I mean, we are so engrossed in consuming animal products that even pulling back a little bit, right? 1 day a week, 2 days a week, 3 days a week, 4 days a week of just eating a plant-based diet. We don't have to go all the way. It's great if you want to eat an entirely plant-based diet, that's wonderful. But we just being mindful of that food, a few days a week is important. But, it's an act of nonviolence, not just to animals, and how we treat animals. It's an act of nonviolence and compassion to ourselves and to our health, because it's so much a healthier lifestyle. It's an act of nonviolence and compassion to the earth, because as you mentioned, the level of carbon emissions is drastically reduced when we shift to a plant-based diet. The amount of resources that feed into how our food is produced is dramatically reduced. And so I agree with you. It's one of the, perhaps it's the easiest and hardest ways to have a positive nonviolent impact. It's easiest because all we have to do is stop doing something. But in a way, it's hard because a lot of us have been doing that thing, consuming animal products for so long. But I think this is maybe a good opportunity too to talk about this idea of nonviolence and why I really like this framing, that you've used. And it's because I've worked in the environmental field for a long time, and we often use these kind of clinical terms to talk about how we interact with the natural environment, right? We say, we talk about carbon emissions, we talk about carbon footprint, we talk about impact. Oh, you're having an environmental impact, you're having a negative impact. In a lot of ways, I think that doesn't really do justice to what we're doing, because these acts are violent at their core, right? When we engage in consumerism, and we are buying things all the time that we don't really need, those are things that take energy and materials to arrive at our doorsteps, and that's coming from the natural world. That is at the expense of nature. It's a natural capital. When we use animals, when we encroach on forests and destroy habitat, this isn't an impact. I mean, this is violence. I mean, people's lives are lost. Animals die, species die, plants die. And so, that's a little bit harsh, but I think at this point in our history where we're facing the greatest existential crisis we've ever faced, let's at least be intellectually honest that
Truthful,
we are
right?
doing
Ourselves.
nonviolence.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we must be truthful with ourselves of the reality and the scale of the situation. And I consider ahimsa, or nonviolence, to be one of the highest, not just religious principles, but moral imperatives for us all to follow. Like, in every part of our lives, we can consider how much harm am I causing through this decision? And then, based on that consideration, make the decision of what item of food to eat, based on non-violence, that you don't want to unnecessarily cause harm. And I feel that you're right when you say, yes, we can intellectualize things and say carbon emissions, or we might say this, but if it's not carbon emissions, it might be acidification, it might be pollution of the oceans, and the terrible situation that the oceans may be in. But I believe non-violence, Joshua, if we, all religious traditions of people from different faiths can take non-violence as the highest universal responsibility, that we should all compete to be as non-violent as possible and as harmless as possible, then that really can produce the outcomes that we desire in the world. How can we tread more gently on the earth? As you know, Jain monks will walk without shoes to not harm the insects, or cover a glass of water so that, you know, no fly is hurt. And there's a lovely story of the Dalai Lama, who I really love, who says, you know, no matter how much meditation he does, when he's asleep, if a mosquito comes near his ear, he still kind of, you know, grabs at it, even though he wants to be as non-violent as possible. Even in his sleep, he's aggressive towards the mosquito. And I think we need to cultivate non-violence as a virtue and a principle for the environment, but I think also to understand what is a truly spiritual life, and what is it that we're achieving.
I love that example of the mosquito, because it's like you want to create a reflex, right? Because humans are such habit-driven creatures. Like, we do things out of habit. You know, the things get wired in our brain. There's a lot of neurological research around this, and you've got to create that opposite reflex of nonviolence, where there used to be a reflex of even subconsciously or unconsciously inflicting violence. And I don't eat meat, and it's not because I don't want to. I'm gonna just to be perfectly honest and share something personal with you, but I have had to create that habit, you know, that I kind of think of it as cognitive dissonance, right? Like, if I'm going to eat meat, I have to necessarily put out of my mind where and how that meat arrived on my plate. And so instead, I put out of my mind, I keep that in my mind, the idea of where it came from. And I'm sorry, there's a phone ringing here, and put out of my mind my desire to eat meat. So it's just shifting around a little bit.
There's a wonderful story in the Upanishads, the Katha Upanishad actually, where Nachiketas is speaking to the god of death, and in that conversation there is a line where he says, you always have a choice. With every choice, is it the right action or the pleasurable action? And sometimes the right action becomes the pleasurable, but when that choice is presented with us, we do have an option to choose which direction we want to go in, and it might be not as pleasurable to the senses or to our personals, but that's where I think spirituality actually comes in. Then that's when you're actually choosing right action in the world, and dutiful. I mean, there are many careers or directions in life one can take to advance materially or to earn wealth. I'm not against wealth. I'm not, poverty positive, but I believe that, you know, you can choose to spend your time or your talent in a particular way to help solve problems, or to help others, or to improve the world that we all live in. And I think that universal responsibility is something that we must all share and promote. And I call it Dharma. When we started this organization, Go Dharmic, it's really a call to embrace one's universal responsibility. And the environment does come at the core of that. And actually, it's kind of like the term, if you think about the Dharma of fire, maybe to produce heat or light. And the Dharma of humanity is to be humane, and to be compassionate, and to serve others. And that's where we fulfill our purpose here through that. Actually, there's one wonderful story in the Mahabharata I'll just share with you. and it comes right at the end. So that the Mahabharata, I'm sure you know, is the longest poem in the world, 1.2 million words. And in the end of that long epic poem, it goes into a story where Yudhishthira, who's the king throughout the story, he climbs the Himalayas and he's nearly approaching heaven or the heavenly domain. And the king of the heaven, or Lord of the heavens, comes to him, Indra, and says, let's go. But a dog has been following Yudhishthira the whole way up the Himalayas. And this dog has been looking to him for sustenance and for care and to be cared for. And Yudhishthira actually says, well, I'm ready to come, but I have to bring this dog. And then the king of heaven says, no, you can't, there's no dogs allowed in heaven. We're actually working on a children's book of this same thing with the same title called Are Dogs Allowed in Heaven? And at that point, Yudhishthira says, he gives a wonderful speech on compassion. And he said, I will stay and remain with this dog because this dog needs my help and I must stay with it. And then Indra leaves at that point, and the dog appears as Dharma, as an embodiment of Dharma, universal responsibility. And the story and the whole of the Mahabharata and the whole thing about it is a wonderful thing of that choice of what should we choose? Should we choose the compassionate choice? Should we choose right action for the welfare of others, for other living beings and for the earth? And in that way, and really doesn't matter which tradition. I believe we can draw out those beautiful narratives, stories, material, which can inspire us towards making the world a better place. I mean, you mentioned prior to our earlier when we were talking, Joshua, about the Jewish tradition and something wonderful about trees. You want to share that? I'd love to hear a little about that verse.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So I've been kind of thinking about the kind of counterparts to the idea of ahimsa or nonviolence in some of the other traditions. And in Judaism, there's a real reverence for trees that kind of shows up a few times in the Torah and in the scriptures and in the commentaries of the rabbis. And there's actually a very important holiday called Tu B'Shvat. It's in the month of Shvat, and it's called the New Year for trees because it's a time when trees are respected and really celebrated for everything that they do for us, that they shade us and they feed us, and they provide the oxygen that we need to survive. They're our lungs. And there are other kind of prohibitions within Judaism that we can't cut down trees at certain times. And so I think this is a really an example of where that compassion for nature, that that requirement that we not inflict violence on nature. A couple other ones in Islam. They say God does not love facade or violence. And what is meant by facade is expressed in verse 205 of the second surah. Basically, facade is that action which results in disruption of the social system, causing huge losses in lives and property. And I love this quote in the Christian tradition from Thomas Merton, who's a Catholic, a monk and a Catholic theologian. He said, "Nonviolence is perhaps the most exacting of all forms of struggle, not only because it demands, first of all, that one be ready to suffer evil and even face the threat of death without violent retaliation, but because it excludes mere transient self-interest from its considerations. In a very real sense, he who practices nonviolent resistance must commit himself not to the defense of his own interests, or even those of a particular group. He must commit himself to the defense of objective truth and right above all of man." And I love that because, I think it kind of relates back to what we were talking about in terms of our diet and,
Right.
our consumer behavior. We can't, he's admonishing us not to think about our transient self-interest kind of these like daily desires that we have, but to rise above that. And as you were saying, kind of constantly remind ourselves of, what it means to be a human, what it means to be compassionate. And it does require us to transcend, beyond those self-interests and look for that objective truth.
100%. And just on the trees, coming back to what you mentioned about trees, I pulled out a verse from the Bhagavad Purana, which is associated with Krishna, the Krishna tradition, and this wonderful verses which are said by the gopis, who are they're singing with Krishna. They love Krishna, and they say, look at these fortunate trees. They live solely for the benefit of others. They tolerate wind, rain, heat, and snow, but still provide shelter for our benefit. Oh, how special is this birth as the trees, which bring life to all other beings. They are like the great persons of this world, for those in need never go away from them disappointed. With their leaves, flowers, fruits, shade, roots, bark, and wood, as well as their scents, sap, ash, nuts, and shoots, they fulfill people's wishes, whether it be through life, wealth, words, or wisdom. A fruitful life is one that is beneficial to other living beings, always endeavoring for their welfare. So
that's beautiful. That's really lovely.
And I think today, when we have the cutting down of trees in all places of the world, everybody's the forests, we're losing them at such a rapid rate. Even in people's smallhold land, everybody's considering removing nature from their localized spaces. I think we need to promote, at least in terms of moral and religious behavior, the promotion of planting and the promotion of caring for trees and caring for the environment, or respecting at least. We're becoming more and more detached from nature, aren't we?
Yeah. Well, and as we know, nature positive solutions are absolutely necessary in addressing the climate crisis. We will have to reverse this trend of deforestation and restore those natural carbon sinks, and really the balance, the ecological balance of the planet, in order to navigate our way through this climate crisis. What you said about trees reminded me a little bit of some folks listening might know the philosopher Martin Buber, who was a great 20th century philosopher and did a lot of field work with trees, where he thought he had this this I, thou, I, it philosophy, where he divided all relationships in the world into either what he called I, it, or I, thou. And the I, it relationship is the vast majority of ways that we relate to the world, where it's a kind of objectification, right? Like, how does this serve me? What do I get from this? From the things that we eat to the people that we have relationships with, to animals and nature. It's, how is this serving me? But he wanted to explore what he called the I, thou relationship, which is not an objectification. It's a way of relating to another being or another thing, like in any living thing, in a way that's not objectifying it, that's not looking for a way to feed ourselves, to serve ourselves. And so he would just sit with trees and listen to them breathe. And it's a very personal way of thinking about, our relationships to forests. Because we don't, we don't often think about, okay, one of the reasons that I'm breathing oxygen right now is because of the Amazon rainforest. It's the lungs of the planet. We don't not really conscious of that on a daily basis, but he wanted to feel that. And so he would sit for hours and hours with trees and kind of like feel them respiring and try to build this I, thou relationship with them. I think that's another pathway. I mean, these are all pathways to changing the way that we think and the way we act.
No, I think, and there's definitely a lot of science that's coming out about being in the presence of trees, being in forest bathing, and the whole culture around what that, even purely from an individual gain perspective, not for the environment or so, but for our own mental state and awareness. I used to work in the city, and Joshua, there was always this small patch of grass in the middle of the square, which we, the city of London is just effectively 1 mile square, and within there's a small patch of grass, and everybody used to flock to that one piece of grass. And everything, buildings all around. When you look out from the balcony, you can't see anything. There's all buildings everywhere, and mentally, you could feel the strain of that on one's mind and lifestyle. And that small piece of grass even offered some solace to people. They naturally moved towards it. It wasn't a conscious thing that everyone was doing. And I feel we need to bring back the importance of that small patch of grass and slowly plant something on it.
Isn't that amazing? Even that little piece of flora, that little bit of turf grass, that people just yearn for that. I used to volunteer with children who hadn't really had nature experiences, and we took them kayaking down a wild river. And I mean, I can't overstate the reaction that they would have to this experience of being immersed in nature. It's like coming home. This is where we come from. We have this visceral, ancestral connection to nature. And, no matter how removed you are from it personally or generationally, you will always come home to it. And seeing these children kind of react in just an instinctual way to being in nature is really incredible. And that's a reason I think that gives for hope also.
Yeah, well, for sure. And I think if we can allow nature to teach us again, instead of trying to teach it, to allow it to move at its own natural rhythms, that for me, that is really what Hinduism is all about. Like I feel that many, like myself, feel that Hinduism's kind of been placed into a line of traditions when it's actually very different. It's more like a nature. It's more like an ecosystem rather than a path. And like the Rig Vedic verse or the traditions, it's not based on just one line or one group of documents that are then made to follow. It's more like Sanatana Dharma, which really means eternal responsibility, or eternal duty, or the way for all living beings. And that way is compassion. And I think if we reduce the harm that we cause, we actually can move back towards that way. And for us, we called our organization Go Dharmic. It's really a call to action to come back towards a more nature, a natural form of living and presenting oneself in the world. And I just wanted to share a verse with you, which was in the Mahabharata. And I'll say the Sanskrit because it's really beautiful. The sound of it is Adroha Sarva Bhuteshu Karmana Manna Savira Anugraha Chadanancha Satam Dharma Sanatana. And it says, never displaying malice towards any living being through actions, thoughts, or words, acts of kindness, and giving in charity. This is the Sanatana Dharma. So the ancient description of the tradition itself is not like what is your book, or what is your, which religious teacher do you follow, or what is the text. The self-description is that of love for all beings and love for the planet, and the reduction of malice, or giving in charity, being charitable as a human being. It's human values, universal values. So I really consider my Hinduism to be the same as every other human being on the planet. And Sikhism very much similar. Like I think Guru Nanak, the words, when you read his words, it's all about humanity. He hardly speaks for a group of people or for a select group. And I feel in some ways that the internet is actually giving us that globalized view in the sense of how easy it is to connect with people from different parts of the world now. We have an opportunity, a unique opportunity to use technology and to use this interconnectedness to recognize that there is no borders when it comes to climate change. There is no separation, and the same for religions, to realize that we can be borderless religions, and traditions can also meld with one another and walk together on common purposes in a very unified and interconnected manner. How do you find, interesting to know that from the Parliament perspective, or with your work, interconnectedness between traditions?
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting you mentioned technology and religion, in the same thought, both as being ways, pathways to opening up our world, through the internet or through exploring other traditions or religions. But I think there's a converse to that too, where the internet can be, it can be a conduit for information. It can also be a conduit for disinformation. And I think we're finding that out right now in the past year in particular, especially in my country, in the United States, just how much the internet can be a conduit for disinformation. And religion is also, a conduit. It's a way to reach God, but it can be abused as well, as we know. We've seen that in a lot of different traditions. So, these are tools. And I think, for Parliament, we see that our mission is to, let's see if I can remember it. I hope my board members aren't watching. It's to foster foster conversations among the world's religions and their guiding institutions, in order to create a more just, peaceful, and sustainable world. And so these conversations between religions are a tool. They're a pathway to getting to what we want, which is that just, peaceful, and sustainable world. And there are, I think, from what I've seen, the statistics I've seen, there's about 6.5 billion people in the world who affiliate with some kind of faith or spiritual tradition, right? I mean, that's the biggest demographic in the world. There is no other demographic that's big. That is the largest group of people, single group of people in the world, is, that broad category of people of faith. And so we've got to use their influence. We've got to leverage their ability to talk to one another, to see each other's humanity, and to work together to solve our problems. Because, and I kind of feel like this conversation is like coming back to where we started. It's like going full circle back to interconnectedness, right? Like we are interconnected, and we do all have a path to God and a way of seeing each other, and that's in a large part, that's why we do the work what we do at Parliament.
For sure. And I think it's so important right now. The faith communities can make the biggest difference to this race to zero and to reducing harm on the planet. And I feel like what you said about the internet being a tool for wickedness and or for manipulation, as well as for good. But I always believe that our essential nature is good. I have that belief that humanity is essentially good, and therefore, if we remove fear from our own minds or reduce it, then we will naturally, because that whole understanding of Dharma is that in like the Chandogya Upanishad, it says the universe is hidden within the cave of our hearts. The truth of the universe, Brahman, or the spirit, is hidden within our own hearts. That can't essentially be bad. That has to be a positive and a good thing. And I believe that, as much as there's been a pandemic, Joshua, if I tell you the amount of wonderful people who have come forward out of compassion to feed people and to help struggling elderly people who have been isolated, and volunteerism in the UK has been tremendous. People coming forward in their thousands, really, to distribute food for nurses and support people and help others. And it's been remarkable to see. I believe that more than COVID, there's been a wave of compassion and kindness. And that spirit is so wonderful to see. And it's borderless between all traditions, people collecting food from the synagogue, taking it to the mosque, sharing it with these people, storing there, Hindu volunteers dropping meals to any person that requires it. It's a remarkable cross community. We're working with the gurdwaras, we're working with the churches, we work all different communities, helping each other on WhatsApp groups, sharing where do you need help, do you need anything, and volunteering to it. It's really shown us something very beautiful at the same time as has been a tremendously difficult time. I'm sure you're aware that at the moment COVID in India has been wreaking havoc and causing tremendous suffering, and in a circumstance like that where thousands of people are losing their lives, people are losing loved ones, to be climate conscious, very difficult for people. They're just trying to make ends meet. So I really feel that as faith traditions as well, like you said, the consumerism side, like is that bad? Is it evil for us to continue to consume in such an elaborate and fast manner whilst people are going through such difficulties that they don't have clean toilets to use or clean water to drink? How can we expect them not to use whatever they need to use to survive and to get through their day and feed their children? I think it's incumbent upon people in wealthy nations and people of some stability to support the weakest members of community and really have that global view. And that's what we've tried to execute through the Dharmic. Really, it's just a strong effort in that direction.
Yeah, it's incredible what you've been able to accomplish. And you told me in one of our earlier conversations, you are basically just have volunteers, right? You have like a couple staff people, and to have mobilized thousands of people to feed and provide meals and feed communities. And I mean, I get the sense that it's like infectious. That that there's this like positive feedback loop where people feel this good feeling, this good energy of having helped somebody, and then they want to do it again, and they want to help other people have that feeling, and that's wonderful. I mean, it's spreading. It feels like it's spreading.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's actually selfish to be a part of it because you see that. And actually, we don't. Have you ever heard of a guy called Ram Dass, Joshua?
Sure. Yeah.
So Ram Dass is like my spiritual teacher, and he was head of psychology, I think, or a leading academic at Harvard in the psychology department. And when he went to India, he came across a saint called Neem Karoli Baba. And Neem, when many of the Westerners who approached Neem Karoli, they asked him, how do we achieve enlightenment? How do we raise our kundalini, like our spiritual energy, or what is the state of yoga? And the answer he gave to them was love everyone, feed everyone, serve everyone. And people were confused. They were like, we want to know how to do some special practice to achieve a state of enlightenment, and he's telling us to go and feed the poor. And that for me was,
little did they know it's the same thing, right?
and everything that we've done is an expression of that love. It's not like that we are doing it. We're just a spoon, and the food is just being served from that energy of that divine spirit. And I feel that, like you said, it's infectious, and it's love, and it's just about service. It's never that we personally. Like the Gita will always talk about the concept, Bhagavad Gita talks about the concept of nishkam karma, where you have the right over your actions, but not the fruits of it, or not the results of it. It's only about doing the work. And beyond that, that's not in our control to say whether it's outcome giving or not. So, even with the climate work, I really feel that everything we do, every moment we spend speaking about it, sharing about it, talking to people, trying to convince people to take a plant-based route, or to share with them why driving a bicycle is better than riding a car over short distances. Sometimes you can get down and say that this is not going to work, or people are not going to listen. but as long as you do the work with the utmost genuine intention and desire for service, then the result hopefully will go our way, but it's not ultimately in our hands. It's
yeah, you know, and that's a great point. And you mentioned fear before, and I think it's important to recognize some of the obstacles we have to living these kinds of compassionate, nonviolent lives that we're talking about. And fear is real, right? I mean, we have a lot of fear right now. We are realizing that there's not a lot of security in the world, or at least there's a false sense of security that we've had for a long time. And we're grieving, you know, we're scared, we're afraid, and we're grieving the loss that we're already seeing of the world that we used to know, that's starting to change before our very eyes. And I think that's something we have to examine. You know, one of my favorite quotes is from a rabbi named Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. And he said, all the world is a very narrow bridge, and the most important thing is not to be afraid. And I think that has this universal truth, right? I mean, it is a narrow bridge. I mean, there are threats all around us,
right.
but fear is, it just makes us step inside ourselves and close up. And I think it's important to examine that. It's a lot harder. It's easier said than done.
Right.
But you know, it's kind of the other part of this. You know, the other part of this conversation is examining those feelings of fear and grief.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think there is a narrow path, and you know, it is there. But for me, I don't personally go very deep into a lot of things. Maybe I'm limited in my ability to understand and assess many things, but I understand that there's an ocean of love, and I'm going to swim in that, and I'm going to share that through what I think is right action. And the rest, like if it's a political debate, or you know, if people are trying to create a negative energy of argumentation, or you know, differences and creating that thing, that is for them. That's their dharma to continue to create. Like this, you know, in Tulsidas, wonderful 16th century poet saint who wrote a Ramayana, and the first segment of his book praises the wicked people. And he says, you know, praises the evil, praises people who, you know, are mean to others and treat people in a terrible way. And he praises them because without them, we would not be able to see the light. We would not be able to see what is good in the world. And without that, so I feel it's always been there. It's going to exist. We have a choice of which path to choose, like Martin Luther King and his adherence to non-violence. Could have been so easy to choose a violent path for him. And so many were trying to lead him, but he stood strong in that non-violence is love. And I deeply appreciate, I mean, he was deeply inspired by Gandhi and the way that Gandhi conducted non-violence. And one of the things we do, which I shared with you on our previous conversation, which I'd love to share again, is that Gandhi walked from Ahmedabad to Gandhi, and he marched in protest of salt law, which was very unjust at the time. The British had a very big tax on salt, which really harmed the poorest people of India. And at the point where he reached his destination, he made salt. And that act was followed by millions of people. And that destroyed this law on salt in a completely non-violent way, in a way where he maintained love and compassion for the British through that. And every year for the environment, we cycle the same distance from Ahmedabad to Dundee. And this year, we're trying to do it from Downing Street to the COP26 conference in Glasgow, which we believe to be one of the most important climate conferences of today. Now, it's from an act of love that we're trying to do that. Joshua, I'd like to invite you to come and cycle with us if you get the opportunity.
I would love to. I would love to. I love a good cycle, a good multi-day cycle.
You may be
Absolutely.
very much ahead of us in cycling, because many of us are complete amateur cyclists, and the UK is full of bumps and hills, and you can't call them mountains, but there's lots of hills, not much straight, and the ride up to Glasgow is pretty much all uphill. So I may need a string or something tied to your bike to help pull me along. But it's just, look, whether what we're doing is right or wrong, it's an act of the heart, and we want to do something to try and make a difference. That is the genuine appeal to all. And I would say that, you know, it may not make a world-changing difference, but it may impact one person, who then may impact someone else, and that is contagious. That love is contagious, and sharing that with others is contagious, and serving other people. So we do it quite loudly with Go Dharmic. In central London or in Glasgow, we are run by a wonderful young Jewish boy, Martin, in Glasgow. He was 16 when he started, and he did 100,000 meals across the city for vulnerable people all throughout COVID.
Incredible.
Wonderful service, and it was just all out of compassion and wanting to make a difference. And I think if we can inspire more people to do that through love, then we're going to have half a chance at making a difference with the climate.
I love that idea of just helping just one person. You know, I first encountered this idea in Judaism, but I've seen it in other faiths too. This idea that if you save a life, you save an entire world.
Right.
You know, that is the incredible significance of life. That it's like a whole universe,
Sure.
right? I mean, and we live in a world where human life, all life, is belittled and minimized, and have had a monetary value put on it. And so, I mean, I think it's feeding somebody is a way to recognize that, you know, that basic truth, that one life is like an entire world.
Sure. No, and I've seen that in Islam as well, that, you know, that concept of saving one person's life is like saving the entire world. That is there. And also you have this idea of Tattwamasi, that you are that person is also Brahman. He is the supreme reality. He is divine in and we are that. So that recognition of the oneness within every person we're serving, and in every moment that we're serving, and living that really in the now is of extreme importance to bringing us back to a universal understanding. And I just want to draw upon some of the key ideas that perhaps we can embody within our faith and within our own lifestyles, which is, one, to reduce the amount of energy that we use individually, two, to go towards a plant-based diet and reducing the consumption of animal products to a bare minimum. I think people in all cultures didn't used to consume the amount of animal products that we currently consume across the whole world. I think it was largely plant-based that we grew as civilizations. But somewhere in the last 100 years, the exponential rise of animal consumption has been, I mean, I think it's what, global emissions are up 60% since 1990. So that just shows us how much has been rapid rise in animal consumption since that time. I think recycling, like we discussed earlier, like ideas such as businesses which promote pre-loved products and reuse of pre-loved products. So many people have so many items stuffed in their houses which are of great value, but just lying there, which can be, the energy can be brought out of those beautiful products for others. So it's not necessary that all purchasing and consumption has to end. There is a way of using a lot more of what has already been produced in a new and better way. And I think finally, I would say that consciously consuming and looking at the products that we're purchasing and looking at where they come from, what's the journey of this product and how has it impacted our world. These should be articles of faith now. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, those are all great examples of, ways that we can, as I said before, distill the teachings of our faith into our everyday behaviors. I love that, what you've laid out. I would say, and that creates that kind of reflex that we talked about, that kind of, okay, let me just think, let me stop and think about each of these decisions that I'm making. Let me create a new habit. What am I buying? Do I need it? Is there something else I can use? What am I eating? Is there an alternative that's better for myself and the planet and for animals? It's like you're talking about creating a consciousness in daily life that is a container for
Right.
those moral obligations. I would say also, just to add to the consumerism thing, think about if you can share something. Like I gave up my car a while ago, and now I just get I use a car whenever I need it. I don't have to buy a car. People share appliances, laundry machines. There's ways to create efficiencies, within our consumer lives that I think are important. So yeah.
No, brilliant. And I love what, like, that thing about which you mentioned, and which is so true, that ahimsa and non-violence are not passive acts. They're active, that we make those conscious decisions through our own initiative and energy to create that change, or reduce the harm that we're causing on the environment. So I just want to finally share that, and emphasize that ahimsa and non-violence and the idea of universal responsibility in Dharma is something for all religions, all people, and people of no faith at all, people that do not believe in a higher power or higher cause or anything.
Mm-hmm.
Non-violence or non-harming is a human action. And I truly do believe that non-harming is actually one of the most religious things that you can do. It's the expression of love for other beings and for our earth, that we express that. And whether it's a religious location choosing to use biodegradable items instead of plastic items, out of that reverence for the earth, that they won't use that plastic item, even though it costs them a little bit more and it pinches and it hurts. And, as every organization has to go through those difficult choices. But ultimately, we have to choose what is right for ourselves, for our communities, for other living beings, and for the earth. And if we're guided by that, we're causing less harm. I believe
Mm-hmm.
we have a chance.
Well said. Well said.
Joshua, I thank you so much for joining us today, and for being on the line. It's everything that we've discussed is in complete unison and in an arrow of love in the right direction. And I hope that we can work together closely towards encouraging and sharing more positivity and more direction towards making a difference towards climate action. And appreciate everything that you're doing, and giving us an opportunity also to share about Sanatana Dharma and Go Dharmic and our overall causes of what we're doing together. So I really appreciate you joining me today, and look forward to spending marching with you together.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for all that you're doing, all of the good that you're creating in the world, and yeah, I'm also really looking forward to working together in the future.
Brilliant. Take care. Lovely
All
to
right,
speak
thank
with
you.
you. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.